The pace of change for the modern tax function has never been more rapid. We're seeing a massive increase in the number of requirements that a tax function is expected to help the organisation comply with. For example, BEPS, but also critically ESG. To me, what those two things have in common is at their foundation, they're fundamentally data problems. So what should you, as a tax leader, be doing to ready yourself for the impact of ESG on the tax function? To help me answer that question, I'm joined today by two guests. Tania Segovia is a partner who leads our sustainable supply chain practice at KPMG, and Becky Townsend is a partner in our Tax Reimagined team who leads on global compliance and reporting engagements for some of KPMG's largest multinational clients. Thanks very much, Tania and Becky, for joining me today. Tania, maybe turning to you first. When we talk about BEPS to clients and assess their readiness for Pillar 2 compliance, one of the things we're often finding is that up to 60 to 70% of the data points they need to be confident in their compliance don't actually exist anywhere in the organisation today and have to be created specifically for the purpose of BEPS. Are you seeing a parallel to ESG in this area?
Well, I would say there is a mix. So there may be some instances where the data is lacking, so you actually need to create that data. But what I see a lot in the ESG space is that the data is actually dispersed within the organization. So for example, if we look at environmental taxes, the data that is required to comply with these new taxes is not sitting within our traditional financial or transactional data. It's actually sitting, for example, with the logistic team or with supply chain. So I think the big change in this regard is actually that there is a need to cooperate within different teams within the organization in order to comply with these new obligations. Typically with our standard or traditional tax processes, we were able within the tax function to manage the end-to-end process. However, with the new ESG compliance obligations, actually the need for cooperation with other teams is more important than ever.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like it's going to be really important to have really clear roles and responsibilities in terms of ownership of the data and accountability for the reporting.
Definitely, Stuart. I think this is a very, very important point, especially with regard to the data. And I think having clear roles and responsibilities is very important, especially with regard to the developing the data model, but also with the maintenance of the data.
Okay, and so Becky, turning to you, I mean, this sounds like the sort of problem you grapple with every day in designing the tax operating model for large multinationals. So how would you advise a tax leader to put in place the structures they need to manage ESG compliance?
Yeah, and it's a big challenge, especially for those organisations that have very decentralised tax functions. And what I'm seeing is that those who are being most successful are those that have assigned global process owners who can bring together the appropriate stakeholders from the organisation at a central level.
So it's really important to have someone who's looking across all of the different requirements and making sure that you're not duplicating effort in sourcing data for the different levels of reporting you might need to accomplish.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and one of the things that I'm seeing in my client base is that even those organisations that do have a process owner are relatively confident in the data, they are still having hesitation around reporting because of what I'd probably call a trust question. They're nervous about, once they put that information into the public domain, what are their external stakeholders going to do with the disclosure? Is that something that you're seeing?
We're definitely seeing that, and historically tax authorities have been able to see this information. Now we've got consumers, investors, shareholders, so there's a wide range of individuals who will now be looking at this information. It's really important that organisations have the data to back up their narrative, and so there's a lot of nervousness, if quite rightly so, if that's not the case. And then the other thing is because of the range of requirements, so you've got public C/CR coming, you've got a BEPS Pillar 2, there's a GIR 207 standard. All of these requirements need to be telling the same story, and so they need to make sure that they've got the time to be able to stand back and make sure that that's the case.
So that comes back to your central process owner point. Someone needs to be tying up the different narratives that are going out in all of these different reporting requirements. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is you unpacked a load of different requirements there, all of which are moving at a different pace. So Tania, maybe turning to you, if you were a tax leader in industry now, what would you be doing to make sure that you're ready for all of these different requirements?
Two recommendations. So the first one is engage, understand what is the kind of the ESG agenda of your organization. And secondly, don't minimize the value you can add as a tax professional to contribute to the ESG transformation journey and compliance of the business. And I would like to share a couple of examples. So for example, the first one is around CBAM. So this is an upcoming obligation that is impacting many businesses from this year. And actually, the scope of this new obligation is being determined using customs tariff codes. So actually, for a business to understand whether they are caught by this new compliance obligation, you can leverage customs and trade data. So I found this very interesting. For example, at KPMG, we have developed a tool just to help business to understand what are those obligations for them. So tax people, they really have a key role to play, and I don't think it should be underestimated. Another example that we have been helping another business recently to comply with plastic packaging tax in the UK, and actually through the data that now they have gathered to comply with this new environmental tax obligation, the business have taken further decisions to transform the supply chain, because through that data they understand the level of non-recycled and recycled plastic they had, and they decided to change the sourcing for some of their products. So actually there is a lot of value in this data, not only from a compliance perspective, but also from a transformation perspective.
So that's a really excellent example, and I think to summarise your advice to a tax leader, it would be don't underestimate the role that tax data can play in ESG, not just in tax, but actually also in business partnering with the entire organisation.
Totally agree.
That's excellent. And putting you on the spot in the same way I did to Tania, Becky, what would your advice to a tax leader today be around ESG and data?
My advice would be don't wait for 100% clarity. With the pace of change and the number of requirements that are happening on a global basis, it's really important to get on the front foot and to start thinking about and start building up those data requirements now. What's really interesting is that we're seeing a huge increase in the number of clients who are asking us about voluntary requirements and disclosures, and they're trying to get on the front foot of trying to build up their information now.
Thanks very much, Becky. So it's really important to be proactive. Don't wait for the requirements to come to you. Make sure that you really understand your data now, you build that solid foundation so that you can be really agile in complying with the requirements as they evolve. That's great. Thanks very much for joining me, Tania, Becky. I've learnt a lot today. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.